Hey guys, it's Ndoplex and welcome over to Borderlands 4. Now, unless you've been living under a rock for the past few days, you have probably seen that there have been plenty of gameplay tests and all that sort of stuff for a lot of content creators over at Gearbox Studios. Gearbox kindly flew out a bunch of creators to go and try and test out the game and see what they thought about it, get a hands-on preview of the game. Now, unfortunately, I'm kind of not a big enough content creator to get invited on this list, and that's fine.
They ask you how you are, and you just have to say that you're fine when you're not really fine, but you just can't get into it because they would never understand.
But I'm just super excited about Borderlands 4, so I feel like I have to talk about it with you guys. Anyway, so I've basically spent the past couple of days watching hours, maybe even days, of all of these other content creators' footage of Borderlands 4 and trying to glean absolutely everything I can from all of these gameplays, all of the reactions, all of the comments of the content creators, all that sort of stuff, and compile it all together for one big cohesive thoughts and breakdown of all the gameplay, story elements, and all that sort of stuff that we can expect in Borderlands 4. What I think about them, what a lot of other people think about them, and all that sort of good stuff. And I've got about 4 pages of notes to go through, so this is probably going to end up being a lengthy-ish video, but there's just so much to talk about in Borderlands, and I thought if I could stick it all into one video, then that might help you guys out. So a big shout out to a bunch of content creators which I have watched their videos and all that sort of stuff. We're talking Moxie, Jolts Dude, Killer 6, Rest Assured, Eruption Fang for story elements, all that sort of stuff. And credit to some of those guys for some of this gameplay that's going to be shown on the screen, because of course I didn't get to play it, so I don't have any gameplay to share with you guys, so it's just going to be gameplay pulled from all of their different sources. So that's the initial breakdown, but what do we have to say? Well, the first things first is the story. I've heard a lot of people talk about the story and have said that overall it feels more closely related to a Borderlands 1 style story. Everything feels a little bit more grounded. Still got that classic Borderlands humor, but slightly less cringe than it has been in the past couple of games. Borderlands 3 is obviously a massive example of that, with Ava and all that sort of stuff. I don't think anyone's going to be disappointed if we just don't see Ava return, so that's one thing there. The story seems to hopefully be, obviously the guys haven't really had to play an awful lot of the story. I think they got to do one mission with very little context, so we don't really know a lot about the overarching thing. We know the Timekeeper's bad. We know there are other kind of psychos, can't remember what they're called on this planet, Rippers I think it is, I think they're called Rippers on Kairos. So we know there are a few different enemy factions that we'll be fighting. Oh, there they are, Rippers on the screen. There's going to be a few different enemy factions that we're fighting, but as far as overall story goes, it seems to be a lot more grounded in this game, which is obviously a great thing. Now, we have 4 Vault Hunters to choose from at the start. We have Vex the Siren, we have Amos, who is the big kind of berserkery character. He looks kind of like Brick. Don't know how much focused on melee he is going to be, because unfortunately for this playtest, they only did get to play Vex and also Rafa, who is the Tidor assassin-y style guy. But yeah, our 4 Vault Hunters are Amon, Harlow, who's this Maliwan soldier, Rafa, and Vex. And obviously all of our gameplay was from Rafa and Vex, because that was the only options that the guys had to choose from. But they have said that they will be adding 2 new DLC characters later on in the game's lifecycle, which is great, because in Borderlands 3 they ended up adding extra skill trees rather than extra characters, and personally I thought this kind of sucked. There was something nice about going up and building a fresh new character, as opposed to just getting a skill tree when you've already got all of the skill points and all that sort of stuff. I don't know, I wasn't a big fan of the way they did it in Borderlands 3, so I'm happy to see that they are going to be bringing new Vault Hunters as DLC later on in the game, so that's great. And speaking of the Vault Hunters, there seems to be a lot of great customization. Once again, loads of different head customizations, body customizations like we started to see in Borderlands 3, as well as a bunch of different skins. Echo 4 has customization, who is your little kind of companion. He's not just a radio in this game, the Echo, he's more of a robot that follows you around. Kind of like BD1 if you've ever played Jedi Fallen Order, he kind of reminds me of that. Or Jack from the old Gears of War, if you've ever seen that, you might know if that could be a little bit niche, but Jack from old Gears of War really reminds me of Echo 4. So that's going to be great. Now, these customizations seem to be purchasable by a currency. We don't know what the currency is yet. It just kind of looks like a rocket icon. No one's had any confirmation of what this currency is, but we know it can be found from doing certain activities and also from finding collectibles throughout the world, like vault symbols. Vault symbols are returning in Borderlands 4. We missed them in Borderlands 3, they were there in Borderlands 2, but this time in Borderlands 4, they are not just a badass rank, they are actually going to reward you with currency for cosmetics, and maybe even a weapon or other things like that. We're not too sure, but they are definitely going to be well worth your while collecting, and they are much more visible in this game. They are like a bright orange light rather than kind of just an outline of a vault symbol. So much easier to see in this game, but hopefully well hidden as well, as I like the challenge of the exploration and all that sort of stuff. One thing about this is if all of these vault symbols are tied to customization and being able to afford to buy customization, all that sort of stuff, there's no confirmation as to whether this is account-wide, so once you've collected it once, you will never need to collect it again, or whether they are character-specific. There hasn't been any talk on it at all. Of course, we had a similar feature to this in Wonderlands, where we had our lucky dice, and these started as character-specific, so every time you made a new character, you'd have to collect more lucky dice to be able to get that increased loot luck chance and all that sort of stuff. Horrible system, but that is what it is. And they did eventually make those account-wide, so you haven't got to seek out the same collectibles over and over again, because collecting them one time is fun. Collecting them 3 times on 3 separate characters gets tedious and boring. So hopefully they are going to be made account-wide, but we don't really have any confirmation on that just yet. Now, another thing to talk about is the art style, and I mean, just look at it. It looks great. It looks like Borderlands, but it looks fresh. It looks nice. It's on Unreal 5, which it looks about as far away from Unreal 5 as possible, which I think is a good thing, because Unreal 5 just looks, I don't know, there's a lot to be desired with it. I think it's still in its kind of growing phases, its development phases, but this game I think looks great. It still reminds me of Borderlands, but it doesn't just look like a reskin of Borderlands 3 or anything like that, so I'm really happy with the way the art style looks. They are once again saying they're bringing it back to this gritty, more realistic style of things. Like Borderlands 1, we have a massive return to form on the amounts of gore and blood and all that sort of good, fun, explosion-y stuff when enemies die. It kind of got tuned down a bit as more Borderlands games came out, and this, I think, looks much better. And I don't know, blowing people's heads off is just kind of fun. Throwing a knife into their face and seeing it pop off is, I don't know, it's nice, it's cool. Who doesn't want to see that? So yeah, the art style is looking pretty good, and the sound design as well seems, I think it seems decent. I don't know, a few of the weapons that I've heard don't quite sound as I think they look, if that makes sense, but overall I think the weapons do sound punchy enough. Just some of them kind of threw me off, and I don't know whether that's just specific weapons sounding the way they do, or whether there is a bit of a sound design issue, but I think overall the sound design seems pretty good. We haven't really heard a lot of music or anything like that, just kind of story trailers and that sort of stuff, but Borderlands never really misses on the music and sound department, so I don't expect them to miss this time round. So yeah. Now, speaking of the world design and the world in general, Borderlands 4 is going to be a massive open world. We are talking, its map is quoted to be bigger than Elden Ring's map, fully open world, no loading screens between transitions, that sort of stuff. It is a full open world experience, which is just amazing. We've never really had that in Borderlands at all. We've kind of had glimpses of it with certain maps like the Dust and stuff like that, but it's never been a full open world, and this one is looking to be that, and I think that's going to be super exciting and interesting. Personally, I'm a massive fan of the exploration side of things. I love exploring a world and figuring out all the secrets that it has to hold, so the fact that we can do that in Borderlands 4 does really excite me, and I'm hoping that's going to be a lot of fun. The UI that you can see on the screen does look pretty clean. I think everything seems to have been condensed down. You have a nice open area in the middle. You've got your waypoint mission summary on the left hand side. The level is now no longer plastered across the bottom of the screen. The actual XP bar rotates around your level, as you can see in the bottom left there, which I think is pretty good. And you can see your action skill and ordnance in the middle. I'll touch further on those a bit later on, but you can see those in the middle, so we have a nice clear field of view. Now, you've probably noticed, and you've probably heard a lot of people talk about it, at the top of the screen we have the compass system and no minimap. Now, this has been a massive point of contention. Obviously, I haven't played around with it, but listening to what a lot of people have said, the compass is not really a fan favorite, and I can understand why, because it can make stuff feel cluttered. You can't really see where enemies are, you don't get a sense of verticality, all that sort of stuff, so it makes following your objective very, very difficult quite a lot of the time. Now, they have actually provided a radar in a later version of the game. Now, this is about a month old of a version that people were playing, but they have added a radar system to the newer versions of the game after hearing all of this feedback, which I think is a great step. I'm still personally a big fan of a minimap. I'd love to have one. The general map that you can open up in your menu is great. It's a nice, solid map and uncovers as you explore it, that sort of style of map. And I don't understand why we can't have that as a mini-map as well. But at the minute we don't have that, but we are getting a radar. So I think that's a big positive there, that they are going to give us a radar. Now, another thing which is such a minor thing, but something I really like, is you can see at the bottom left under our shield and health, we can see that this character is called an electric transistor, which is a class name. Now, you probably have missed this if you've only ever played Borderlands 3. But back in Borderlands 2 and Borderlands 1, and obviously the pre-sequel, we had class names. So when you picked up a class mod, it would change your name ever so slightly, so you'd be something different. An example of this was you could use a Zerocom, which would change your name from being a shadow assassin to like a true professional or something like that. Just a tiny little thing, but it helps you stand out and helps you feel more integrated into the role. And I think it's cool to see that that is seeming to be returning with our class mods, because I have seen various different names at the bottom left of people's screens. So obviously different class mods are going to provide you with different like subclass names, as it were, which I think is definitely really great. Another thing to touch about the general world is the cutscenes. And now it is known that all of the cutscenes are in-game rendered, which is great, because that means as you customize your Vault Hunter with different heads and skins and colors and all that sort of stuff, they will appear like that in the cutscenes. And yes, your Vault Hunter is actually going to be appearing in cutscenes. That was a massive problem with Borderlands 3, because you would kind of not exist in the cutscene world and then somehow reappear, and it kind of took you out of the experience a bit and made the story feel really weird. So being able to see our Vault Hunters in cutscenes is great, and having these cutscenes in-game rendered means that we'll see us how we look in the moment. And also you might be able to pull some funny things off with Vex's cat or something like that. You can chuck him in the cutscene, that sort of stuff. It's fun. It always adds just a level of humor and interesting things when you see like an enemy fly across the screen mid-cutscene. So I'm a big fan of the in-game rendered cutscene, especially when the game looks as nice as it does. Something that not a lot of people have touched on, and it is understandable, is performance. Now, everyone had universal, like, overwhelming praise for the performance, but they were playing on a specific gearbox setup where obviously they would have the, you know, great CPU and all that sort of stuff. So the performance universally was great for people, short load times, all that sort of stuff. But it'd be interesting to see how that fares on slightly less powerful PC setups or even the consoles. We're not really too sure, but at the minute performance doesn't seem to be an issue, so that's a good thing there. And with all of that sort of stuff out the way, let's talk about the bread and butter of Borderlands, the gameplay. Now, the gameplay looks incredible. I will say it looks like the best gameplay we've had in any Borderlands game to date, which is a amazing thing. Now, Borderlands 3 did have some updates to its movement and that sort of stuff, but personally I still just liked the feel of Borderlands 2. It just felt right. I don't know, a lot of the weapons just didn't feel like they were meant to feel in Borderlands 3. I think they did update it and change it a little bit to make it feel better, but personally I wasn't a massive fan of the way the Borderlands 3 combat went. But Borderlands 4 looks pretty insane. The movement tech is crazy. We've got slides, we've got mantling like we had in Borderlands 3, but we now have the grapple, we now have double jumping and air gliding, all of these things allowing you to carry a lot of movement and a lot of momentum throughout this game. And it is going to make speedruns and that sort of stuff of this game super interesting, kind of mastering the controls and the ways to carry your momentum forward. It all seems really great, so I'm very excited about that. Now, guns. Borderlands is guns. It's all about guns, and the guns look pretty cool. I will say they look pretty awesome. They all look different and unique, and they look new to the franchise, with obviously returning features that you come to expect from your sort of Jacobs weapons, always looking like Western revolvers and that sort of stuff. So that kind of theme is always there, but there are so many weapons that look so new and unique and interesting and cool. And These weapons can all roll with things called licensed parts, which change the weapon's behavior. So you can have a Vladov weapon, which is just a kind of bog standard, let's say, assault rifle, and it can roll with a Tedior licensed part, which gives your Vladov assault rifle the ability to Tedior throw reload, which is crazy. And then it can also roll with a Jacob's part as well, meaning when you get crit hits with your Vladov assault rifle, then you throw it to reload it, these crit hits are going to bounce towards other enemies because they have a Jacob's license parts. So the weapon diversity in this game seems just absolutely mind-blowing. They did touch on purples and legendaries. They talked about purples being having the most variety in the amount of licensed parts they can roll. Purples can roll with 4 licensed parts, so you can have 4 different manufacturers shoved into one weapon. Legendaries roll with 1 less because one of those licensed parts classes as the legendary prefix, as it were, so that is always a static, and then the other licensed parts can change. So it is going to be interesting to see how difficult it is to get our quote-unquote perfect weapons. They did say in a developer interview, shout out to Moxie on this one, I watched his developer interview, and they did say that the loot chase was going to be good, but still obtainable, because we had things like the white elephant in Borderlands 3 where it had like a 1 in 900 million chance of it rolling, or 900 billion I think it was, which is just, it's completely unobtainable. No one's ever going to get a perfect part, and while perfect parts are not the kind of be all and end all, it is always nice to have a perfectly rolled item. I think it's cool, it gives you that sort of loot chase, and as long as it is obtainable, it feels feasible to be able to get these items. So the loot and the weapons and everything in Borderlands 4 seem really cool. They did say that they wanted to make purples feel relevant again, because in Borderlands 3, if you weren't using a legendary, you just weren't even bothering to play the game pretty much after like level 3. You had to be using a legendary or it was basically worthless. The balance was just so out of whack in Borderlands 3. You couldn't deal any damage with a white weapon, and then you had legendary weapons that you could use for like 20 plus levels because they're so overtuned to compensate for the ridiculous mayhem mode that we had in Borderlands 3 that at a lower stage of the game, like level 10, level 20, these weapons could be viable for like 30 levels. It's just absolutely ridiculous. So they have talked a lot about balance and changing, and they said there isn't anything that resembles mayhem mode in Borderlands 4, and hopefully we can keep some semblance of balance in this game, because notoriously the end game of Borderlands across the entire franchise pretty much has just been completely out of whack, where you'd have some weapons that are amazing and will one-shot bosses, and other stuff that is just totally unfeasible and does absolutely no damage whatsoever. So I'm excited to see what they do with it, and I'm hoping that they can keep the balance in a good enough place where you can do things like a white weapon only challenge run without it just being totally unfeasible like it is in Borderlands 3. That's pretty much all I have to say about weapons. We obviously have the classic rarities: white, green, blue, purple, legendary, and although pearlescents are not currently in the game, Randy Pitchford did drop a little bit of a hint in one of his interviews about the chances of pearlescents returning, which is very exciting. So I think we will be getting them, just not maybe right at launch, which is fine, because right at launch we're going to be playing through the story, getting to grips with the game and that sort of stuff, and then they can add the more in-depth loot chase later on in the game, which I think is absolutely fine, but I would love to see pearlescents return. One of the new systems that is added into Borderlands 4, however, is going to be the ordnance system, and now this replaces our rocket launchers and our grenades. There will be no more dedicated rocket launcher and grenade slot in Borderlands anymore. These are now all fused into a ordnance system, which can hold multiple different things like miniguns, grenade launchers, grenades, throwing knives, rockets. It's all kind of bundled into this heavy weapons ordnance system. So you can still use your traditional rocket launchers and your grenades and that sort of stuff, but it is lumped into, you can see at the bottom of the screen, it's lumped into the G function, which is your ordnance tab. Now this has a set amount of ammo. It's going to differ between whether you're using a minigun, which might have 500 ammo, to a rocket, which might have only 30 shots or something like that. So it is going to differ slightly. And what will happen is you pull out your ordnance, and you can use it until your ammo kind of expires, and then when you put it away, it goes on a cooldown. So it's almost like a skill, but not quite. You haven't got to worry about ammo or anything like that for these, which is great. It's more of a cooldown system, because like you'll probably know if you played the end game of Borderlands 2, if you want to buy some rocket ammo or some grenades, you got to take out a mortgage on your house to be able to purchase some ammo. It's absolutely ridiculous. So I'm glad they're doing away with this, and hopefully it'll make the ammo economy slightly better and make you want to use it more than you ever did in the previous games, because it just felt like the ammo economy was so bad with our heavy weapons that you just never really used them. And if stuff like in Borderlands 3, the grenades felt so plentiful that they kind of felt underwhelming, and I just never found myself throwing them, because it was like, who cares, the grenades don't seem to do much damage anyway, so what's the point of me even using them? So they're going to be much more impactful in this game. And I will just say, we have throwing knives as ordnance as well, which was a specific highlight for me in a few clips I saw. It looks absolutely insane. They look super fun, and without fail, every time I saw someone throw a throwing knife and get a headshot, like a crit with a throwing knife, it would always one-shot like a basic kind of mob. Obviously not a boss or anything, but they seem to deal substantial damage, which is great. That's what you want. You want them to feel impactful and feel like they're worth using. And I think by doing it in this way, making them slightly stronger, but giving them this sort of cooldown without having to rely on ammo, is going to be a great middle ground. Obviously, I haven't had my hands on to see, but a lot of people seem very positive about it, which I think is great. Another thing to talk about the gameplay is these new things called rev kits. Now you can see at the bottom left on the T-bound button, we have rev kits, and these are like stims. If you've ever played Call of Duty, you can stim yourself. You can do like a quick syringe, that sort of stuff, to heal yourself throughout combat. And in Borderlands, we've never had this. The only healing has ever been provided to us is from just random drops out of a chest, or enemy drops like a syringe of healing, or from action skill healing and different skills in the skill tree, which are still going to be present in Borderlands 4. I think we had a quick peek at all of the skill trees, and every single Vault Hunter has access to lifesteal later game, but everyone also has access to these rev kits, which it seems like they all have 2 charges, but they do come in different rarities, all the way up to legendary, I believe. So you might get ones that have different amounts of uses on them and that sort of stuff. And they also are not only for healing. Rev kits might have a slight damage reduction on them, or a little bit of a movement speed boost and that sort of stuff, but the core of them is going to be a readily accessible heal for all Vault Hunters right from the get-go, which is great, because there is obviously a massive problem to do with healing in general in the entire Borderlands franchise. They've never managed to nail it down properly, so I think these rev kits are going to be a very interesting and a good way, I think, to do healing within Borderlands. Now, I just wanted to touch on the grapple a little bit more, because I was always a little bit skeptical on how the grapple was going to work, but it does seem like they've done a pretty good job with it. The grapple points seem relatively plentiful, and you can grapple like barrels and stuff straight into your hand to throw at enemies, so it does make the gameplay and stuff feel a bit more dynamic. As well as in some boss encounters, the grapple is absolutely mandatory to be able to do certain parts of an encounter, certain different things, so you might have to go up to a higher platform to use the grapple. So they do seem to have implemented it in a good way, making you want to use it, but also not forcing you to use it all the time. It seems to be a happy middle ground, and from what I've seen, I'm happy with the way the grapple has turned out so far. Along with the fact that you can carry your momentum in movement with the grapple, that is again great. I was praying that they weren't going to restrict our movement with the grapple into just a one-dimensional animation, but it does seem you can kind of slingshot yourself away from objects and that sort of stuff, so the grapple does seem pretty decent. Another thing to touch on with the gameplay is the difficulty of it. Now, I will say that it was stipulated to all of our content creators out there that the gameplay at the Gearbox test was slightly tuned up from what it is going to be in the main game, and pretty much universally, all of the people said it was the most difficult Borderlands game they had played to date. Now, I really hope they don't tune the difficulty down too much. I want the game to still feel difficult and challenging. That's where a lot of the fun is for me. I mean, I'm a massive fan of games like Elden Ring and Dark Souls, where the challenge is just integral to the game, and you've kind of got to get good at the game and progress encounters in it. It has that feel-good feeling. And there was a lot of people that said this game was hard, but everybody that said the game was difficult enjoyed the fact that it was difficult. No one thought that it was hard just because enemies had ridiculously inflated health pools or anything like that. It seems to be balanced in a way where it's difficult but without just artificially inflating the difficulty by just raising the health walls and making enemies one-shot you. That's no fun. But having just a good baseline difficulty of the game seems to be what they've gone for here, and seems to be really effective. Like I say, hopefully they don't tune it down too much to make the game just trivial, like kind of what happened in the base game of Borderlands 3. If you didn't have any mayhem modifiers in Borderlands 3, the game is just a steamroll all of the time. It's just ridiculously easy. So hopefully we do have challenge back into Borderlands. Bring challenge back to Borderlands is what I say, and it seems like that's what they're going for. Now, other things that have been shown are these encounters that you can have, more challenging encounters. I think Jolt's dude had an encounter where a ship turned up and he was actually able to teleport up into a ship and do a combat encounter, and because he wasn't too sure about the mechanics of the encounter and was kind of getting familiar with the controls and that, he actually failed the encounter and didn't get rewarded for it. So I think that's really cool. I would like to see more of these things where you have a chance to do this difficult encounter, but you might just fail it and you'll have to come back and try it again when you're better at the game, you've got better weapons and that sort of stuff. So big plus on challenging encounters. That all looks cool. Other things that happen in the open world are these things called world bosses. Now, there was a lot of confusion as to what the world bosses were going to be, but from everything that I've watched so far, world bosses are going to be random encounters that appear at set areas in the world, and they can be totally unique and new bosses, or they could be like a bandit encampment that spawned with a story boss, which I think is really interesting. I think it was Rest Assured video that I watched, and he had Horus, which was the story boss that they fought during this gameplay demo, and he actually appeared in a bandit camp as just a random world boss, which I thought was really cool. Now, an interesting thing to note about this was the bosses in Borderlands 3, quite a lot of them had these immunity phases, which are this just artificial inflation of difficulty, which just felt annoying. You just sat around waiting for the immunity phase to go before you can deal more damage, and it just felt bad. Now, I did see that in this story encounter of Horus, he did have a slight immunity phase. Now, this was for story-related purposes, so it's not too much of a gripe, but when Rest Assured fought the exact same boss in the world encounter, that immunity phase that happened halfway through no longer happened. So it seems like these world bosses are going to be, like I say, some recycled bosses, but without the story mechanics with them. Obviously, they're still same, like he still flew around, he still shot the energy orbs at you and that sort of stuff, but didn't have this lockdown on immunity phase, which I just thought was a really great idea, because I can understand how some boss encounters need to have an immunity phase for the boss to spill out some dialogue or do some exposition or transform to a different mode or something like that. But once you've seen it once and then it appears as a world boss, take away the immunity phase, I think that is great. So a massive plus there. Something that we're not too sure on, however, is whether you need to, first of all, have killed a story boss for it to show up as a world boss. I presume it does, otherwise you're going to have weird modes where you haven't fought a story boss yet, but you've already killed it as a world boss. That just seems weird and kind of off, so I hope they don't do that, and I hope they just have world bosses that spawn after you've killed the mainline story boss. So world bosses seem to be a really cool, interesting thing, and just to make your general gameplay of the game more dynamic and more varied every time you jump on and play. So yeah, again, very, very cool. Speaking of world bosses, something that I should have touched on maybe at the start of this video was the fact that this game is going to have 4-player co-op multiplayer, which is obviously great. Full matchmaking, all that sort of stuff. Crossplay is all there from the start, which is great. Now, no one really got to test the co-op out in this game, because if you were doing a co-op recording session, you weren't allowed to record the footage, so pretty much every developer universally decided to play solo and actually record some of their footage so that they could show it with us guys. So obviously I think that's very smart of them, but we haven't really got to see much co-op gameplay. Hopefully it'll function pretty good. It has always just felt a bit janky within Borderlands, the co-op. It's never felt quite right. There seems to be a lot of delay and stuff, so hopefully they figured it out for this game. But the fact that it is there at the start, ready to go, is obviously great. Play with your friends. Borderlands is best with your friends, so that's great there. Another thing to touch on briefly, we're talking more about gameplay now, is gonna be the Fight for Your Life. Fight for Your Life is a thing that's been in Borderlands since the very start, and it is kind of a classic Borderlands thing. It is, of course, returning in Borderlands 4, and seems to be very similar in the way that it worked in Borderlands 3. You can move in Fight for Your Life as well as shoot, and now it didn't look like you can aim down sights, and there was Guardian rank in Borderlands 3 that provided you with different perks to make Fight for Your Life more accessible, like being able to aim down sights or even throw grenades and that sort of stuff. That didn't seem present in the base of Borderlands 4, but I would imagine they're going to have some sort of badass rank Guardian system, that sort of end game feature like they have in all of the other Borderlands games. So I presume that's going to be prevalent here, but Fight for Your Life is back, and Fight for Your Life is, of course, great. I'm sure there are certain things in the skill tree that we haven't seen yet that allow you to revive your allies from a distance, like Maya's rares and that sort of stuff. That was all really fun. I always enjoy that part of the game. Something that didn't seem as good was if you actually fail your Fight for Your Life, there seems to be a very long penalty for it, and now we are talking a 20-second respawn time, which you might think, oh, 20 seconds, that doesn't sound too much, but if you're in a difficult encounter and dying quite a lot of the time, 20 seconds really adds up. So yeah, not sure too much how I feel about that. I understand that a lot of time and effort is put into showing the death animation and all that sort of cool stuff, but 20 seconds does seem a long time. I know you want to punish us for dying. You're not supposed to die, and if you die, you should have a punishment, but a 20-second respawn time, it does seem like it's a bit too long, and it's going to take us out of the fight a bit too much. So hopefully they might just shorten it, maybe cut it in half. I feel like 10 seconds is kind of fine between the animation of respawning. You still get time to see it, but it's not quite as egregious as it is at the minute. So that's another thing there. In terms of looting in this game, Borderlands is obviously a looter-shooter. Looting seems to be relatively streamlined in this game from what I've seen. All of the colours of the weapons and stuff seem very vibrant, so you know instantly which weapon you're about to pick up and that sort of stuff. And you could also pick up weapons directly into your junk. If you pick up a white weapon and you think it's just trash and you don't want it, you can just instantly pick it up into your junk, so that when you get to a vending machine you can just one-click auto sell all junk, which is of course going to be great. So I like the look of that. And also the lost loot machine has returned, which is good because Borderlands is a notoriously janky game, and sometimes you just don't see a weapon, or a weapon falls through the map or something like that. So the lost loot machine is always there to recover some hidden legendary that you never even knew you got. So I think that is a great feature. Speaking of legendaries, we do have some things to discuss with legendaries. We know for a fact there are going to be some returning legendaries. We have already seen the Complex of Brute, which I think was found by Rest Assured, I want to say, and also the Hellwalker, again from Borderlands 3. The Complex Route was from Borderlands 3, and also the Hellwalker. Both are going to be confirmed returning, which we have seen in this build of the game. So we are definitely going to get returning legendaries, but having seen these weapons be shot and stuff, they do feel like they're different enough, but still retain their core identity, which I think is going to be great. You want the weapon to still feel like a new weapon. You don't just want to pick up a Complex Route and be like, this is the same old weapon from Borderlands 3. It was alright then, but I've already used it and I'm not that interested. It does feel different enough, but you still have that cool effect where all of the bullets are sort of bouncing around in a, you know, unique and interesting way. So the core identity of the weapon is there, but they feel new enough in this game from what I've heard that it's not going to just feel like you're picking up the same boring legendary weapons over and over again. And I'm sure, of course, we're going to get a bunch of new legendaries anyway. It was also confirmed in this game that you can find legendary weapons in vending machines. We found a legendary weapon in a vending machine, so that's cool. Hopefully the chance isn't super high. I think there was only one streamer that managed to find it, so I'm really hoping that it isn't that common an occurrence. But being able to find a legendary in a vending machine in Borderlands 2 was always really cool, because it was such a rare thing that happened. It always felt nice when it did happen. So that's obviously great. And also, it seems like they have made a big discussion about the legendary hunt in Borderlands 4. They wanted to make legendaries feel more impactful. I touched on this a bit in a previous video, but legendaries in Borderlands 3 just felt so overwhelming. You do an encounter and just see like 5 or 6 legendaries pop up, and it just lost their legendary factor. It just felt like another standard weapon. You know, if you weren't using a legendary, you weren't even playing the game, because they were so common and plentiful that you'd always have legendaries at all times. And they did say they are bringing back the loot chase a little bit more, making legendaries a little bit more harder to come by, so that when you do get one, it means more. It just feels better when you actually finally get the legendary. And the actual art of farming legendaries is going to be easier than ever with Moxie's boss revival system. There's a console that you can click after you've completed a boss. You can click this console and it will actually automatically respawn the boss for you without having to save quit. So gone are the days of having to save quit, farm everything. You are going to be able to farm a boss as much as you want just with the press of the Moxie button. So that is absolutely amazing. One of the most fun things you can do in Borderlands, in my opinion, is actually farm for equipment and legendaries and that sort of stuff. And being able to respawn a boss as and when you want is a massive plus, in my opinion. Now, I wanted to touch quickly on our two characters that we saw, and that was Rafa and Vex. Now, like I said at the start of the video, we have only seen these two. We were only allowed to play these two. But I will say, from what I saw, all of the action skills and stuff like that felt fun. They all looked pretty unique. You've got Rafa's melee exosuit ability, but then you can also spawn like a secondary weapon with him on one of his other skill trees to allow you to almost gun Zerg like back in Borderlands 2. So there is a lot of different and unique action skills in Borderlands 3, and they all seem to be fun and unique in their own way. Now, each Vault Hunter is going to have access to 3 different action skills in their skill tree, as well as different augments. One particular augment that I thought was really interesting was when you're playing Rafa, if you're using his melee exosuit, there's actually an augment that allows you to continue this action skill after the timer has run out, but instead of being locked on a timer now, it actually reduces your HP. So I just thought that's a really interesting mechanic, because there's also another thing in Rafa that allows you to heal as you're dealing melee damage. So if you can keep the melee healing up high enough that it counteracts the health depletion, you might actually be able to keep your action skill active for a very, very long time. So the augments and the different customizations in the skill tree seem like they are bigger and better than ever. So hopefully build diversity and everything like that in Borderlands 4 is going to be absolutely insane. One of my favorite things to do is build the character in unique and different ways. Melee only runs and all that sort of cool stuff. So the fact that it does seem that our skill trees are the most in-depth and diverse that they ever have been, I think is going to be really, really cool. Another thing just to mention briefly about the open world is the vehicles. Now, we of course have returning vehicles in Borderlands 4. Vehicles have kind of been a staple of every Borderlands game, but have kind of sucked in every Borderlands game, which is a bit funny. But in Borderlands 4, you can just summon vehicles from absolutely anywhere. You don't have to go to a vehicle respawn station or anything like that. You can just summon them on your person whenever you want. Obviously, if you're inside in like a specific kind of dungeon, you might not be able to spawn them. But if you're out in the open world, you will be able to spawn your vehicle on top of you very quickly whenever you want, which is amazing. They kind of act like sparrows. If you've ever played Destiny 2 and you've spawned a sparrow, kind of act in a very similar way. So I think, honestly, I kept asking for that in older Borderlands. I kept saying, God, I wish they had like a sparrow like they did in Destiny, because that would be amazing. And, well, we have that now, except our sparrow can also shoot, which, yeah, of course, the vehicle combat has never been great in Borderlands, but it's always just been there. And from the look of it, it seems to be relatively decent in Borderlands 4. We didn't get to see too much of the customization in terms of the vehicle customization, but it is known that each different Vault Hunter has their own unique vehicle and their own unique couple of vehicles that you can also unlock. So there are multiple vehicles for each different Vault Hunter, and they all do have their own unique vehicles with, you know, a machine gun on, a rocket launcher kind of attachment, all that sort of cool stuff. So the vehicles are looking to be the most fluid and interesting that they have ever been in Borderlands, which is obviously great, good stuff. What else do I have to mention? Oh, another thing I wanted to mention briefly is our level ups. Now, of course, when you level up in Borderlands, you go from, let's say, level 10 to level 11, and you get another action skill point. Well, another returning feature is when you level up, you are going to get that damage boost per level. It started, I think, in Borderlands 2, I want to say, where as soon as you leveled up for a minute, you would get double damage and a full heal. That seems to be prevalent in this game as well. It doesn't seem like the damage is quite double. I'm not sure what the damage modifier is, but you're still going to get your full heal, and you're still going to get a damage boost on a level up, which is such a small feature, but I always just kind of enjoyed it. It just felt good, and it felt powerful to get your level up. You do genuinely feel like you've leveled up because, oh, I start doing way more damage and I get the full heal, and you know, so I'm very happy that that feature returns as well. What else haven't I touched on? Oh, more to do with the gameplay and the actual movement. You've probably seen it. There is actually the introduction of swimming in Borderlands 4, which is obviously pretty interesting. Unfortunately, there is no underwater exploration, and you can't shoot your guns while swimming or anything like that. So it is seeming to be 99% just a traversal tool, but it is nice that your Vault Hunter doesn't just immediately die as soon as you touch water, which was the case in the older games. So it's good to see that that is there, at least, even if you can't really do an awful lot with it other than traverse around a little bit. But you can grapple out of the water, and you can seem to move relatively quickly in the water, so it doesn't feel like a burdenous thing to be in the water. So I think it is overall a good positive that swimming's there, but it's again not adding too much to the game. Now, just one negative thing I wanted to talk about very briefly, which isn't that much of a negative, but there is no photo mode seemingly in this game just yet, and that has been present in Borderlands 3 and was a very loved feature in Borderlands 3 because it allows us content creators to make thumbnails much easier, and also allows you to just kind of see your character within the world and create a cool screenshot or a screensaver for your computer or anything like that that you want. Doesn't seem to be present in Borderlands 4 at the moment. Now, again, everyone was playing on a build of the game that was already a month old, so it is possible that they will add it in the future, but it is something that I just thought worth noting, that there wasn't a photo mode currently. But hopefully that will be added in the future. Maybe not at launch, but hopefully in a DLC. I can't see why they wouldn't, other than the fact that there was some janky stuff you could do in photo mode in Borderlands 3, such as skipping certain door triggers and stuff like that. If you just pushed your camera through the iron bars on a gate, you could just open a gate from the wrong side. There were a few janky things like that in Borderlands 3, but that's very easily fixable in Borderlands 4. So I can't understand why they wouldn't give us a photo mode, but I just thought it was worth mentioning that there is no current photo mode in Borderlands 4. And I think before I pass out of oxygen loss, because I've just been spewing for literally the past 40 minutes, I'm probably going to leave it there. I could genuinely talk about Borderlands 4 24 hours. Honestly, I'm so excited for the release of Borderlands 4. I can't wait to get hold of the game myself and play it, but I have watched so much about Borderlands 4 that I just saw it worth mentioning, compiling basically all of the streamers' views together along with my views and letting you know what I thought the overall for this game was going to be. Gameplay, story, combat, graphics, everything like that. And I think this is my full take of where I see the game at the minute. Personally, I am super excited for this game, and you can expect a lot of Borderlands 4 videos when the game releases on September the 12th. If you haven't checked it out already, I do have a series ongoing at the moment where I'm killing a raid boss from the older Borderlands games every single day until Borderlands 4 releases. I think we're about up to day 18 or 19 out of 96 so far, so we've still got a ways to go, but it is a fun little series, and I'd really appreciate it if you did want to check it out. Be sure to like, subscribe, let me know what your thoughts on Borderlands 4 were in the comments down below. I read all of the comments on the channel, and I love interacting with you guys, so please do let me know about that. I also have a Discord link in the description down below, which I would love for you guys to join as well. We are slowly building a community over there on Discord as well, which is super fun. And with that all being said, I think that's everything I can reasonably throw at you in one video without it being just absolutely ridiculously long. But yeah, Borderlands 4, it's exciting, I'm excited, and I hope you guys are too. Thanks for watching, take care, and I'll see you next time. Bye bye.